Dr. V. Chandrasekhar is working as lecturer in philosophy in the Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda College since 1996. He has been awarded the degree of PhD by the University of Madras for his work in the area Yoga and Analytical Psychology. He has been teaching Indian philosophy, Western philosophy, and recent European philosophy for undergraduate and postgraduate students. He has participated in many seminars and presented papers in a variety of topics. He has also reviewed 2 books in ethics and Indian culture published by the Tamil Nadu Textbook Society for Plus 2 course.
Welcome to the UGC series of lectures in philosophy. I have been dealing with the Greek philosophy, especially the pre-Socratics. In today's class, we will be dealing with the transition of philosophy into positive science. Of course, this will be a continuation of where we left in the last class, especially with the philosophy of Anaxagoras. Before that, let me introduce you the 2 students that I have today with me, Mr. Vijay Sarathi.
Hello.
And Mr. Badri.
Hello, sir.
In the last class itself, I told you that Anaxagoras was born in a place called Clazomene. The place is somewhere here, Clazomene, and he was born in a rich family. He abandoned his riches and settled down in Athens in pursuit of knowledge. He was interested in philosophy and science, and hence he left all his riches and settled down in Athens. In fact, scholars say that he was the first to transplant philosophy in the land of Athens. He was born sometime around 500 BC. He was the first philosopher who introduced a spiritual principle which gives life matter and form. He laid down his doctrine in a prose work on nature, written in the Ionian dialect, of which fragments are not fully available. Of course, Anaxagoras is held to be the first philosopher who brought in a spiritual principle. In order to explain the origin of the world, we saw how Empedocles spoke of the mixing of the 4 elements, and while talking of the mixing, we must always find out what makes the 4 different elements to mix. Empedocles brings in the element of love and hate. Of course, this he uses in materialistic terms, but Anaxagoras was the first to introduce a spiritual principle, which we will be seeing later. I mentioned it in the last class. He calls it as the nous, and of course, this thing he brought in his work called On Nature, which is not available to us now. Anaxagoras was attacked by his own people. Why? I told you in the last class, Anaxagoras came into contact with one great statesman called Pericles. People who are opposed to Pericles conspired against Anaxagoras, and how could they do? This is what I told last class itself. Whenever in those days people wanted to speak against somebody, the best thing they could do was to tell that he was speaking atheism. Those days, anybody who speaks atheism was condemned. So, they said that that was an easy method for people to condemn somebody. Similarly, Anaxagoras was also condemned by his own people in the name of blasphemy and atheism. But why? The reason for that is his Anaxagoras' theory of the sun and the moon. Sun and the moon have been regarded to be divine principles. In fact, even Aristotle later days considers sun and moon to be divine principles, but it was Anaxagoras who came forward for the first time to suggest that sun is nothing but a red hot stone out there in the sky, and moon is nothing but a form of earth which has been separated from the earth, but has the capacity to reflect light of the sun. Imagine this kind of a theory brought shock amidst the people of Athens. This is enough for the detractors to go to condemn Anaxagoras. Then we also saw that Anaxagoras is a follower of Anaximenes, and he is said to have revived Milesian way of thought. that is, he admits the original mass to be infinitely divisible, and that universe as composed of a variety of stuffs, each containing a portion of every other stuff. We also saw that Anaxagoras was a follower of Anaximenes, and he was trying to revive the Milesian way of thought in the post Parmenidean period. This is what I told you in the last class itself. That is, during the time of Anaximenes, Thales and others, they were trying to interpret the world in terms of ultimate principle, reality, but it is Parmenides who spoke of what the reality is and what the nature of that reality is. But after Parmenides, again comes Anaxagoras to talk of the ultimate reality in terms of what Anaximenes said. So, we find that Anaxagoras characterizes the original reality to be a kind of a mass which contains whatever is existing in this world presently. However, this reality is a undifferentiated mass, he says, undifferentiated because now we know that things exist differently, gold is gold, aluminum is aluminum, but the reality that Anaxagoras talks of contains everything in one. Therefore, it is an undifferentiated mass. Anaxagoras follows Empedocles and the atomists in maintaining that matter is uncreated and indestructible, and that all becoming or change can be accounted for by the mixing and unmixing of the component parts. In fact, in the last class we were looking into the development of Anaxagoras' philosophy, especially with respect to the Empedocles and the atomists. How? Simply, we must have one thing in mind. The philosophy transforming itself into positive science developed with Empedocles, of course with Anaxagoras they say, but there is a difference. In the case of Empedocles, he tried to talk of the reality in terms of 4 ultimate principles. Of course, he was trying to reconcile the philosophy of Parmenides with that of Heraclitus. We all know that Parmenides spoke about something that is permanently existing and that he called being, whereas Heraclitus spoke of that which is constantly changing. In order to reconcile this, Empedocles comes forward with a theory which holds that matter is eternal, while the composition of the world keeps changing. So, what the world we have now is nothing but change, a becoming. This is how he tried to reconcile. However, he spoke in terms of 4 ultimate elements. He calls them roots of all. We call them the 4 elements, namely earth, water, fire, air. Following this, Anaxagoras also spoke of reality as that which is eternal, but undergoes change. Instead of limiting himself to 4 ultimate principles, Anaxagoras, we saw, talks of innumerable number of reality. Why? In order to account for the plurality of the existing objects in the world, Anaxagoras spoke of a plurality of ultimate principles, wherein it is not only earth, water, fire, air the ultimate principles, but whatever exists in the world as objects has got its ultimate in its own form, namely being bone or hair or air or water or air, earth. This is how he speaks of. Now, Anaxagoras followed Empedocles in and also the atomists in maintaining that reality is one, eternal, but undergoes change. To him, the reality is neither created nor destroyed, it is that which is. Of course, it is a theory which Parmenides talks of reality as that which is. However, going in line with Heraclitus, he talks of change of this that which is. Now, this is where we find the comparison between Empedocles, atomists and Anaxagoras. In the case of Empedocles, there were 4 ultimate principles which combine. The 4 ultimate principles, earth, water, fire, air, which are neither created nor destroyed, but they combine together to form the world. In the case of the atomists, we have various kinds of atoms which differ quantitatively, but they mix to form the world. Similarly, in the case of Anaxagoras, we have different elements. In the case of Empedocles, there are 4 ultimate realities: earth, water, fire, air, 4 ultimate elements, which are neither created nor destroyed, but they combine together in order to form the world. In the case of the atoms, there are various kinds of atoms which are differentiated quantitatively, but they come together to form the world. Similarly, in the case of Anaxagoras, we have ultimate matter which is neither created nor destroyed, but they mix and unmix to form the world. Let us see the similarity and dissimilarity between Anaxagoras, Empedocles and atoms. The similarity between Anaxagoras and atoms or Empedocles should not be extended. Anaxagoras does not conclude like them. Instead, he considered all kinds of matter as equally ultimate: gold, bone, hair, earth, water, wood, etc. Yet another difference: the atoms hold matter to be divisible into its smallest particles, but Anaxagoras advocated that matter is infinitely divisible. That is, world formation is through unmixing of the undifferentiated stuff. As I told you earlier, the atomists and Empedocles spoke of some ultimate principles which are neither created nor destroyed, but which come together, which mix together to form the world. The same way, Anaxagoras also talks of certain ultimate principles. Of course, it is not 1 or 2 or 4, but many. He talks of plurality of ultimate principles. For the simple reason, he wanted to talk in terms of plurality to bring out the plural existence of the world. Similarly, with respect to atomism, atomism also talks of certain principles which are neither created nor destroyed, namely the atoms, which differ quantitatively, but these atoms are the minutest particles, the smallest, the indivisible particles, beyond which we cannot divide further. That is what they call as the atom. But in the case of Anaxagoras, the ultimate particles are divisible ultimately. We do not know when the division started, therefore, the mixing also we do not know when they mixed. So, this kind of a ultimate indivisibility is spoken of by Anaxagoras. That is the difference between Anaxagoras and atomists. He talks of commixture and decomposition. The world formation is through unmixing of the mass, wherein like matter comes together with like matter, gold with gold particles, wood particle with wood particles. In the case of Anaxagoras, he talks of 2 principles, namely the commixture and decomposition. Since Anaxagoras speaks of certain ultimate principles which are neither created nor destroyed, the only way he could explain the formation of the world is through coming together of these ultimate principles, and explains the destruction of the world through the separation of the ultimate principles. This coming together of the principles he calls it as commixture, and separation of the elements he calls as decomposition. That is what we find here, wherein when once the different matters are separated, we find independent matters like gold, bone, air, water, etc. So, what happens is we will be seeing in the cosmology later how the principle of unmixing takes place and how gold becomes gold, water becomes water, air becomes air. This is what we will see later. Since matter is infinitely small, mixing is complete and hence unmixing takes a lot of time. So, gold becomes a matter in which gold predominates, everything is called that of which it is most in it. What we find in today's world, be it gold or wood or anything else for that matter, has been separation of that particular matter or matter particle from other matter particles, because in the reality everything existed together. But now, when did this composition take place? When did the whole reality become one? Nobody knows. It is a long drawn process, we do not know when it started. Therefore, decomposition also will take a very long time, for the simple reason the coming together had taken place long back. Therefore, the complete decomposition also takes a very long time. Therefore, what happens is each element has got every other element in it. If you take up a gold, it is not exactly gold in full, it is only predominantly gold. For everything, every other matter is present in gold. If you take up wood, every other matter is present in wood. Only thing is wood is more, wood particle is more in it. Therefore, everything is called by that name which is more in particles. When gold particles are more, it is called gold. When wood particles are more, it is called wood. Therefore, the different objects that we see here in this world are basically unmixed from others, yet they have all other particles within them. This is what he says. Now, if we have different particles mixing or unmixing from each other, what is the force that brings about this mixing of the particles or unmixing of the particles? This is where Anaxagoras brings in one principle called nous, or in Greek, which means mind or the spiritual principle. This is what I told you in the beginning itself. He was the first to introduce a spiritual principle. He calls it as the nous. Of course, in the case of Empedocles, he brings in love and hate, which is responsible for mixing and unmixing of the elements. However, love and hate was spoken of by him in a purely materialistic term, but it was Anaxagoras who brings in a spiritual concept, namely the nous.
So, sorry for the interruption, I have a question on this. What does Anaxagoras mean by nous and how does he characterize nous?
Now, why did Anaxagoras bring in this intelligent force? When the elements are constantly mixed together or unmixed from each other, why do we require a third entity, and that into an intelligent force? Anaxagoras explains it thus. We find order and harmony. Of course, if there is going to be a force, a blind force, there can be mixing and unmixing, as in the case of Empedocles. He explained love and hate as being the cause for mixing and unmixing, but this kind of a mixing and unmixing does not speak about, does not explain the order and harmony existing in the world. If at all order and harmony has to exist, then it has to be governed by a intelligent principle. This was not thought about by other philosophers excepting Anaxagoras, and that is the reason why Anaxagoras brings in the intelligent principle. We are, in fact, in the last class itself I gave you the example of the bus. The bus has the ability to move, but unless the driver is there, it will not move in a ordered or in a harmonious ordered way. Therefore, similarly, if the elements have to mix and unmix in an orderly way, then it must be guided by an intelligent force, and that intelligence force he calls it as the nous. Because this is what I have given here. Can blind force produce motion and change? Of course, blind force can bring about motion and change, but the change would be meaningful only when governed by a plan. Hence, Anaxagoras brings in the concept of nous. How does Anaxagoras characterize the nous? You will be wondering what this nous is. I have told you it is an intelligent principle. Is there a way in which Anaxagoras tries to explain this? Yes, he does explain this nous in his own way. Of course, it is given to kind of division in philosophy at a later time, but let us see how he does it first and then go into that. Two divergent ways. Some say that Anaxagoras conceived of the nous as incorporeal, while others say that Anaxagoras conceived of the nous as a material force. This intelligent force has been characterized by Anaxagoras in two different ways. Of course, whether Anaxagoras really considered these two views or not is not sure, but this is how people take it. That is, some say that Anaxagoras explains this nous in an incorporeal way, whereas some people, some scholars say that he explains it as a material force. All Anaxagoras does is he characterizes the nous with certain terms. With the use of these terms, some people say that he is talking of in materialistic terms, some people say that no. Of course, We saw earlier with respect to the philosophy of Parmenides also, when Parmenides explained the being in certain terms, this was referred to or interpreted by others as a case of materialism, while certain others interpreted it as idealism. Similarly, in the case of Anaxagoras also, he only brought out certain terminologies to explain how this nous can be characterized, how this nous can be characterized, but people who came after him said that because he characterized the nous in this way, he is talking of materialistic angle, whereas some people do not accept that. How? What are the reasons because of which Anaxagoras' philosophy is considered to be materialistic? Let us see now. Why is it said that Anaxagoras considered the nous as being material? He, that is Anaxagoras, describes the nous as the thinnest and purest of all things, as being unmixed, and all nous is alike, both greater and small.
Can you throw more light on this, or what do you mean by this?
When I say that the mind of Plato is greater than the mind of myself, it does not mean that the mind occupies more space. Similarly, when Anaxagoras talks of the nous to be thin, he is not talking of the nous as occupying space. Let us not understand the nous as occupying space when Anaxagoras talks of nous being thin or small or greater. Therefore, some people say that these ideas of occupying space is something that came up later. Similarly, the idea of mind and matter was brought out much later in the time of Descartes. Therefore, we do not know whether he was talking of materialistic or idealistic angle. Can Anaxagoras' conception of the nous be incorporeal? Some say that it need not be materialistic in nature. Of course, this is what I explained. The greater and smaller need not refer to occupying space, and non-spatiality of mind is a modern concept. Let us now see the function of the nous. The nous is essentially a world forming and not a world creating intelligence, according to Anaxagoras. That is, the nous arranges the matter that exists alongside it eternally. The nous is not a world creating entity, but a world forming entity, in the sense that the nous does not create the world, it only arranges what is available. The material particles exist alongside the nous. The nous is not creating any of the material particles, it only arranges them. Therefore, the function of nous is only to bring all these things together or to separate them. Something similar we find in Indian philosophy in the case of Prakriti and Purusha of the Sankhya philosophy, wherein the Purusha is the conscious entity which initiates action in the unconscious Prakriti. This is the function of the nous, and after the whole thing is the action is initiated, the material particles keep acting. How? That we will see when we explain the cosmology of Anaxagoras. With this, we will end today's class, and let me summarize some of the important features of this class. Anaxagoras seems to be the first philosopher to have spoken philosophy in Athens. To him, universe is composed of a variety of stuffs having the share of every other stuff. World formation takes place by the unmixing of the ultimate mass, wherein like matter comes together with like matter. Only an intelligent principle can govern the order in the universe. The intelligent force behind this world formation is nous. With this, we will have to look into how the nous initiates the action and how the action takes place. That forms the cosmology of Anaxagoras, which we will see in the next class. Let me now identify some important questions for you. Bring out Anaxagoras' characterization of the nous. Is the theory of Anaxagoras similar to that of Empedocles and the atomists? Discuss. Why is it held that Anaxagoras' philosophy is materialistic? Students, with this we come to the end of this class. However, the cosmology of Anaxagoras is pending. I will explain it in detail in the next class. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.